Now we're moving on to osmosis. And osmosis is actually just a special type of diffusion. So the whole thing about temperatures and concentration gradients and viscosity and all of those things apply to osmosis as much as they apply to simple diffusion or facilitated diffusion. But osmosis tends to be one of those things that biology majors have trouble learning the first time. And I hope to make that a little simpler for you. First of all, when it comes to any exam or quiz, there are only three types of questions about osmosis. The first type of question about osmosis would really be questions like, what is osmosis? So those would be definitions about osmosis. So let's try that. In order to have osmosis, you need to have a selectively permeable membrane, right? So when water is just diffusing across a membrane, but everything else is free to diffuse as well because you've got a permeable membrane, we don't actually consider that osmosis. So with osmosis, it is actually, wait, do I have the video? It is the movement of water through, or I could say across, a selectively permeable membrane, right? It's also important to remember that osmosis, as I said earlier, is just a type of diffusion. It's the diffusion of water in a certain circumstance, okay? And we'll talk about how water moves or why it moves one way or another in a second, right? So what else do we need to know about osmosis? Oh, you should know that osmosis generates force. It generates pressure, right? When water enters plant cells, it enters into those big central vacuoles by the process of osmosis. Then it creates force and it pushes against the cell wall of the plant. And that's what makes a plant that's alive feel turgid, right? Like a fresh rose just right from the florist, okay? But when water leaves because the plant is drying out, then everything gets kind of floppy, right? Like wilted lettuce. And that is because in the absence of the pressure generated by osmosis, you don't have that structure. So those are things you need to know about definitions of osmosis. Now, after that, you need to know how to figure out these definitions: hypertonic, hypotonic, and isotonic. And then the third set of questions will be, will water move? And if so, which way will water move? All right? By the way, you can't do step 3 until you have mastered step 2. So osmosis is a special type of diffusion. It's the movement of water across a selectively permeable membrane. Selectively permeable. So in this case, earlier I showed you a permeable membrane. In this case, this membrane is selectively permeable. So whatever this little pinky purpley sphere is, it is not allowed to move across the membrane, but water can. Perfect setup for osmosis. In the situation where there's a selectively permeable membrane and where the concentration of solute is greater on one side of that membrane, then water will move from the side that is has less solute to the side that has more solute. Yeah. And actually, this picture here, that would really happen. If we had a beaker like this with a nice watertight seal, then we actually would see the water level on one side get higher, the water level on the other side would drop, appearing to disobey the law of gravity. But that is because osmosis generates force or pressure. It is a type of passive transport because it actually is a type of diffusion, and diffusion is passive transport. Now, the next thing I want you to learn are hypertonic, hypotonic, and isotonic. I'm going to present you with two options for how to learn these definitions. Pick one. Don't try and do them both. Just pick one and learn it, okay? So let's start with the way these names actually were invented. In science, this prefix hyper always means too much. Like if you've got a hyperactive nephew and you have to babysit him, you're like, oh, this kid is too much, right? So hyper always means too much. And the opposite of hyper is hypo, not enough. This prefix iso means the same. So a hypertonic solution would be the solution. Oh, I should tell you this. These words are always words of comparison. Aha, here's that image. These are always comparison words. Like if I asked you, is your coffee warmer? You would think that was a strange question because you know the word warmer is a comparison question, right? The coffee is warmer than the cup, but is colder than when you poured it, right? So it's safe to say the coffee is warmer than the cup, but the cup is warmer than the counter, and the cup is colder than the coffee, right? That's not weird, okay? So these terms that we're going to talk about, they also are words of comparison. Here's another reason why people don't like osmosis, is when we're biologists, or particularly in the field of medicine, we're always comparing any solution to the concentration of solute that's found inside of living cells. And that goes unsaid, and that's not fair, but that's the way it is, okay? So hyper means too much. So if you've got two solutions, beaker A, beaker B, the hypertonic one is the one that has the higher concentration of ions. Remember, hyper means too much solute, okay? The hypo one would be the one with not enough solute, whatever that solute is. Could be sugar, could be salt, could be glucose, could be, it doesn't matter. And isotonic means they've got the same concentration of solute, isotonic. There aren't that many isotonic questions on our exams and quizzes, but if you get to more advanced biology, it becomes a more sophisticated concept and you might bump into that. Okay, here's step one. This is how the terms were invented, right? If you like that, don't even look at step two, okay? Here is the second option. So the hypertonic solution is always going to be the one that is less like pure water. And you can remember it like this, less. See, hyper has got an E in it, and this is the solution. Out of these two beakers, this is the one that is less like pure water. So let's just think about and that makes the hypotonic one the one that's more like pure water. Ready? So let's just think about it. I've got two beakers in front of me. One has got water in it. One has got water with a tablespoon of sugar. Which one is more like pure water? I just told you this one was pure water. So, hey, so the one with a tablespoon of sugar is less like pure water, right? So that's a second way of learning it. But can you see that if you mixed them together, you could get everything exactly wrong? Don't just learn hypertonic less, because then you might think less solute. And it's not less solute, it's less like pure water. That's why you got to pick one. Now, whether you pick option one or option two, memorize this. If one of those solutions is water, the water is always the hypotonic one, okay? Always. Always, 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 okay? So water, if one of them's pure water, distilled water, that's going to be the hypotonic one. The only way water is not hypotonic is if you've got two sides of a beaker with distilled water on both sides, which would be a weird exam question. Maybe I'll do that one. I don't know. But anyway, Remember, water is hypotonic. And by the way, if you remember water is hypotonic, it's easier to remember that the hypotonic one is the one with the lower concentration of ions because water has no ions in it. And it's easy to remember that the hypotonic one is more like pure water because it is pure water. Okay? Alrighty. So that's step 2. Step 3, which direction will water osmose? Water always goes from hypotonic to hypertonic, always. So 2 sides of a beaker, my beakers are strangely square, right? And over here we have got 1% salt, NaCl. Here we've got 2% salt, right? Which way will the water move? First of all, we need to know, is the membrane selectively permeable? Because if the membrane's not selectively permeable, then the salt's going to move. Okay? So first of all, if I tell you this, but I tell you that the membrane is permeable, water's not going to move because water will only osmose. It'll only osmose when there's a selectively permeable membrane, right? After that, you say to yourself, okay, I know water always goes from hypo to hyper. Which side is hypo? Which side is more like pure water? This one is, okay? Which side has less solute in it? This side. Just pick one way to learn hyper and hypo, stick with it. And water always goes from there to there. So water would move from side A to side B. And that means the level on side A would go down, the level on side B would go up. There you go. All right? So that's how you're going to get everything right. Here I've got solute depicted by little red stars. Beaker A, is that a beaker? Solution A is hypertonic compared to B. B is hypotonic compared to A, but B is hypertonic compared to C. Comparison words. All right, let's do some questions. Okay, inside the dialysis bag, it doesn't matter what a dialysis bag is. Inside the dialysis bag, there is 5% glucose, right? Outside the bag, there is water. Ooh, yay, there's water somewhere, okay? So which one is hypotonic? The fluid in the bag or the fluid out of the bag? You have memorized that water, H2O, is hypotonic, right? So the fluid in the bag is hypotonic? No. The fluid in the bag is hypertonic because it is less like pure water or it has got more solute in it, either way. So what I always would recommend that you do is you take the definition that you have memorized. You've memorized the definition for hypertonic. Let's say you're using less like pure water, more like your pure water. So you're going to take the question, you're just going to cross out hypertonic and write less like pure water and more like pure water, and then you're going to think about it, okay? The fluid in the bag is 5% glucose, outside it's water. The fluid in the bag is less like pure water. The fluid in the bag is more like pure water. Easy peasy, answer A. You will not get these wrong. Let's do one more. Maybe you're using the other way of learning things. Inside the dialysis bag, there's 5% glucose. Outside, there's 4% glucose. But you memorize these definition, that hypertonic has more solute in it, hypotonic has less solute in it. Fine, cross out the word, write the answer over it, and then you can answer it. The fluid in the bag has more solute in it. The fluid is 5%, 5% is more than 4%, so still answer A, right? You're not going to get anything of these things wrong.